Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is TVP World. You're watching World News. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and these are the latest headlines. Polls are now open in Germany, and voters across the country can cast their ballots to elect a new government. 4 candidates are in the race for chancellor: incumbent Olaf Scholz of the Social Democratic Party, CDU leader Friedrich Merz, Robert Habeck of the Greens, and Alice Weidel of the AfD. According to the latest polls, the CDU is leading with 30% of the vote, followed by the AfD at 20%. Olaf Scholz's SPD is trailing with around 16%, while the Greens are expected to secure 13%. At a campaign rally on Friday, Merz again ruled out any coalition with the AfD, saying the CDU would seek other partners to form a government. The AfD was previously excluded from power despite winning a majority in last year's Thuringia state elections, as other parties upheld the so-called firewall tradition of blocking parties deemed to be extremists from governing. Pope Francis is in critical condition after experiencing a severe asthma-like respiratory crisis on Saturday, according to a Vatican statement. The 88-year-old pontiff remains conscious but is receiving high-flow oxygen therapy. On Saturday, the officials said he was, quote, more unwell than yesterday. He has also undergone blood transfusions to treat anemia. Francis has been hospitalized with double pneumonia at Rome's Gemelli Hospital since February 14th. While the latest update on his condition is unusually detailed, his medical team has not provided a prognosis. U.S. President Donald Trump says he is very confident about reaching a deal to end Russia's war on Ukraine, possibly as soon as this week, according to White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt. Let's go live to our Ukraine correspondent Oz Chatterjee for reactions from Kyiv. So, morning, Oz. From Kyiv's perspective, how likely is it that an agreement is actually close?
Well, I certainly don't think Kyiv thinks an agreement is close. We understand that Donald Trump, a delegation sent by Donald Trump, U.S. officials will be meeting with Russian officials again in Riyadh on Tuesday. However, the Ukrainian government has already said that it won't recognize any agreements made between Russia and the United States without Ukraine being included at the table. So I think it's very unlikely from Kyiv's perspective that any kind of agreement is forthcoming, especially as early as this week, despite what Donald Trump's press secretary says or what Donald Trump himself says. Remember, during the campaign trail, he said he would end the war in 24 hours as soon as he entered office, and that hasn't happened. And I expect that the same will happen with this comment about solving the war by the end of next week. Trump also says that he thinks he's pretty close to signing a deal with Zelenskyy on rare earth minerals. We understand from the Ukrainian side that they still don't think that an agreement is close. That could change within the next few days. Parliament here is expected to start deliberations on it on Monday. So that could move relatively quickly if Ukraine gets the concessions it's hoping for from the United States. But as for a wider peace agreement with Russia, that seems quite premature. Now, as these talks are ongoing, Russia continues to bombard Ukraine, strikes on the Ukrainian central Ukrainian city of Kryvyi Rih. A missile strike left 1 person killed and 5 injured. So while these negotiations are ongoing, Russia continues to bombard Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, civilian residential buildings, and killing Ukrainian civilians. Back to you in the studio.
All right, thank you so much, Oz, for the update, and please stay safe out there. Meanwhile, appreciate it. With the war in Ukraine set to enter its 4th year on Monday, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has thanked the Ukraine's allies for their continued support. In his nightly address, he emphasized the importance of security guarantees and once again stressed that any peace negotiations must include both Ukraine and its allies.
Security guarantees are something that is very important to us. Europe, the US and all our partners in the world need a common approach to ensure that Putin can no longer deceive anyone and that Russia cannot bring death to other nations, any nation from Ukraine and Europe to Syria and the countries of the Middle East and Africa, In the last 30 years we have seen too much destruction and death, for which Russia is to blame, the Russian army, its special forces, its mercenaries. The world needs guarantees, and I thank everyone for their support. In fact, we are talking with all our partners about security guarantees and concrete manifestations of support, actions, assistance, decisions, messages. Now, on the eve of the third anniversary of the start of the full-scale war, it is important for all Ukrainians that the world stands with us, that we stand in a strong position, that we stand with the fundamental goals and principles of the UN Charter regarding the sovereignty of nations, the territorial integrity of each state, and the protection of every nation in the world from aggression. Justice should not be an empty word, and it is important for every nation.
One person was killed and 5 others were wounded in a Russian airstrike on Kyiv in the Dnipropetrovsk region late Saturday night. Russia also launched overnight drone and rocket attacks on other parts of the country, including Kyiv. The strike on Kyiv caused significant damage to civilian infrastructure, hitting 12 apartment buildings, a retirement home, and a church. A nearby gas station and several vehicles were also affected. 3 of the injured have been hospitalized, with 1 woman reportedly in critical condition. The British government will announce a new package of sanctions against Russia on Monday, marking the 3rd anniversary of Moscow's attack on Ukraine. Since the invasion in 2022, the UK has already sanctioned 1,900 individuals and organizations linked to Putin's government.
Welcome.
British Foreign Secretary David Lammy announced the move in a statement on Sunday, adding that, quote, "This is the time to turn the screws on Putin's Russia." The decision comes at a time when the new U.S. administration has taken charge of ending the war in Ukraine, effectively sidelining Ukraine and its European allies. Lammy called the recent change in U.S. policy, quote, "a critical moment in history of Ukraine, Britain, and all of Europe," adding that now is the time for Europe to double down on our support for Ukraine. Lammy also stressed that Ukraine cannot be excluded from negotiations regarding its future. Polish President Andrzej Duda met with U.S. President Donald Trump at the Conservative Political Action Conference, the largest gathering of the American right near Washington, D.C. According to the White House, Trump reaffirmed the strong alliance between the United States and Poland and praised Duda for Poland's commitment to increasing defense spending. Their meeting, which lasts less than 10 minutes, was held behind closed doors with no media present. Shortly after, Trump took to the stage at CPAC, reinforcing his ties with international allies like Poland.
US President Donald Trump told me not to worry about anything. What was extremely important for me, he said, "Listen, you are one of the most credible allies. Your defense spending, purchases in the United States, which you carry out, all the contracts we have with the United States, these are bonds that are tightening." In terms of Ukraine, I also had a one-on-one conversation with the president where he told me, in short, what his plan of action is. He said he has to lead the negotiations and there is no other way out there. There is the only way for the war to end, but in my opinion it also means strengthening Ukraine as well as American presence in Ukraine. Maybe we are not talking about a military presence because President Donald Trump didn't say that, but he talked about economic ties which he wants to tighten with Ukraine. He said that he wants tight cooperation and that he will certainly negotiate this with Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
One person has been killed and another 3 wounded in a knife attack in the city of Mulhouse in eastern France. According to the country's anti-terrorism prosecutor's office, the attacker assailed local police officers while shouting Allahu Akbar, a common declaration of faith used in Islam.
The peaceful city of Mulhouse witnessed horrific scenes when on Saturday afternoon a 37-year-old Algerian man used his knife to attack police officers and killed a 69-year-old Portuguese passerby who tried to intervene. One of the wounded officers is in hospital.
So the one who is still in hospital is a parking officer who is still being monitored. Fortunately, his prognosis is no longer life-threatening, but he is still seriously injured. He will be taken to another hospital tomorrow for further examination.
France's head of state, Emmanuel Macron, extended his condolences to the family and called the attack an act of terrorism.
The Public Prosecutor's Office has taken up the case, as has the French National Anti-Terror Prosecutors Unit, thus qualifying this as a terrorist act, which is undoubtedly an Islamic terrorist act, given the terrorist's expression.
The country's interior minister, Bruno Retailleau, visited the city of Mulhouse and shared more details about the suspect.
We have an individual who has been illegally present on French territory for years, an individual who has been convicted and sentenced by the French courts for glorifying terrorism, an individual who has a particular psychological profile. When he was arrested, a forensic expert identified as schizophrenic profile.
The attack sowed fear among the city's inhabitants.
I have lived in France for 41 years, and I have never experienced anything like this. This is the first time I have experienced something like this, and I am very shocked. I live here next door, and now when I go to the market, I will be a little nervous.
Now the hardest part for the city will be getting back to its normality.
Serbia's student protest movement is gaining momentum, with demonstrations spreading across the country. From mass marches to worker and teacher uprisings, unrest continues to grow as tensions rise.
The latest show of determination comes from Zrenjanin, where the students from the Mihailo Pupin Technical Faculty have embarked on a 100-kilometer march to Vrsac. This follows similar protest hikes, including the major demonstration where Belgrade students marched to Novi Sad and gathered in Kragujevac.
We put our personal ideologies aside because what we're doing here is bigger than all of that. We're trying to build a country, we're trying to make the institutions function.
Our message is that we are not giving up and we know what we want.
Protests in Serbia began after the roof of a newly renovated railway station in Novi Sad collapsed last November, killing 15. Lack of oversight and wider government corruption are blamed for the disaster.
These protests are possibly the biggest challenge to Alexander Vucic's government since he became president in 2017. Initially, the protesters were not listened to, but with time and perseverance, the government started to make some concessions.
Both the Serbian Prime Minister Miloš Vučević and the mayor of Novi Sad Milan Durić have resigned in an attempt to appease the protesters. President Vučić has also announced that he will be replacing 50% of his ministers, but he himself is not so eager to resign. Additionally, the Higher Public Prosecutor's Office in Belgrade has announced the arrest of several government officials.
The arrested persons are charged with abuse of official position in inciting and assisting, as well as money laundering.
The protests sparked by the tragedy have quickly evolved into one of Serbia's largest anti-corruption movements in recent years. At the same time, the Serbian president blames, quote, foreign powers for the protests.
Serbia is under attack, not only from the outside, but also from within, by those who want to manipulate our youth, abuse them for the most corrupt political purposes, and win something that the people did not give them in the elections.
Freedom House has assessed Serbia as a democracy in transit, and its freedom score based on people's access to political rights and civil liberties is only 57 out of 100, while another ex-Yugoslavian country, Croatia, scored 83 out of 100 and Slovenia 96 out of 100.
And with that, we conclude this edition of World News. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.